Wikileaks founder Julian Assange is in the midst of a final legal bid to convince 7 British Supreme Court judges that he shouldn't be extradited to Sweden, where he faces allegations of sexual assault. Jennifer Robinson is a human rights lawyer and legal advisor to Assange and Wikileaks. She was also recently engaged in the United States proceedings against Private Bradley Manning, the man charged with leaking 250,000 classified documents to Assange. Jennifer Robinson joins us from London, where she's been attending the extradition hearing. Welcome.
Good morning.
Are you confident that Julian Assange can win this appeal?
Well, I think we have to be confident when we consider what the precedent will be set if he doesn't win this appeal. If he doesn't win, it means that anyone can be extradited from the UK, be arrested, put into detention at the behest of any prosecutor anywhere in Europe without having to show any evidence, without being charged and without proper judicial oversight. So I have faith that the British justice system should not and cannot stand for this sort of precedent.
And the British justice system, of course, has to look at whether or not they're establishing a precedent about extradition to Europe, which is supposed to be a single legal zone.
That's correct. It's a very important point of principle that's up before the Supreme Court. The question is whether a public prosecutor can be considered a judicial authority. If the Swedish prosecutor is not a judicial authority, then the UK does not have to extradite Julian to Sweden, and in fact there's no legal basis to do so. It seems like a rather simple point, and to an Australian or British lawyer it seems very straightforward. Of course the prosecutor cannot be a judicial authority. They are by their nature partisan, a member of the executive, and cannot be independent or impartial, particularly when in this case the Swedish prosecutor is in fact a party to the proceedings.
Yes.
She cannot be impartial by nature of her
But of course,
function.
as you would know, there are very big differences between European law and English law.
Of course, but the question is whether the Swedish prosecutor can be considered a judicial authority. It's a matter of European legal principle, and that is very clear that it is important that judicial authorities are independent and impartial, independent from both the government and from the parties, and in this case the Swedish prosecutor clearly is not.
So when will the court make a decision?
We've got one more day of argument today here in the UK, and it's unlikely that the Supreme Court will hand down its decision today. It will rather reserve its decision, and Supreme Court decisions normally take anywhere between a month and 3 months' time.
Is your major concern, if he is extradited to Sweden, that he might be convicted of a crime there, or that he might be extradited to the United States?
Of course, our concerns are numerous with respect to the Swedish justice system on these sorts of cases, but a key concern is the risk of his extradition to the US, whether it be, irrespective of whether he wins his appeal. If he's released here in the UK, the US could seek his extradition from here, or whether he ends up in Sweden, he could also be extradited from Sweden to the US. What we've seen is that the US has an ongoing criminal investigation. I saw from the Bradley Manning proceedings myself that there were repeated references made between the criminal investigation that the Department of Justice is undertaking and the Bradley Manning proceedings. The Bradley Manning's counsel himself, in fact, said that the Department of Justice has an interest in placing pressure on Bradley Manning to implicate Assange, and that the nature of the charges brought against him and the way in which he's been treated is designed for him to make that plea bargain and implicate Assange. So we are very concerned about the risk of onward extradition to the US.
Yeah, you believe that the United States, the fish that they want to fry really is Julian Assange and not Bradley Manning?
The US government has made it clear that they're going after Assange. There's an ongoing criminal investigation, and it was made very clear by Bradley Manning's own legal counsel in the proceedings in the US held just before Christmas that the Department of Justice has an interest in Bradley Manning implicating Assange. So we are very concerned about the risk of onward extradition to the US.
Why isn't it more likely from Sweden than from the UK?
It's equally likely from both jurisdictions. I think the concern about the relative ease, whether from Sweden or the UK, misses the point, and the concern is that he could be extradited to the US at all to be prosecuted for his publishing activities associated with Wikileaks, which we believe are protected by the First Amendment. All Australians ought to be concerned about Julian's treatment there, and we need only look at the way that Bradley Manning has been treated, the nature of his incarceration. He's been held in inhuman and degrading conditions which have been denounced by the international community, and it is a grave concern that Julian could be facing prosecution in the US for his publishing activities.
But the US has yet to come up with a crime that he has committed.
That's correct. We don't know what they're planning to prosecute him, which laws they're planning to prosecute him under. This criminal investigation is ongoing. It's been ongoing for 18 months. We don't believe that there's any grounds for prosecution, but we do know that the US is actively seeking to prosecute Julian, and it's a real concern that there may already be an indictment in place, and that the US government is simply waiting to see what happens in these proceedings with respect to Sweden until they make their move.
Just finally, you've been around this a long time with Julian Assange. How is he coping with this personally?
I think he's coping incredibly well under the circumstances. We have to remember he's now been under house arrest for more than 400 days without charge. His movement is restricted. It's limited his ability to do his work, but he's coping the best he can under the circumstances. And I think he remains sure and clear in his conviction that what he's doing is right and that Wikileaks will continue. So I think he's coping incredibly well in the circumstances.
Jennifer Robinson, thank you.
You're welcome.